When we first started doing this, there was nobody in trial advocacy talked about social science. Nobody was talking about that back then. There was no reptile, there was no rules of the road, there was no case framing, there was really nothing. People would stand up, mostly good lawyers would stand up and tell you how they got this great verdict. And so when this came in, it began to change the way other lawyers began to think about their cases, and they began to think in, I think, more organized fashion. And I think it's been very, very helpful, for the trial advocacy group.
How is this helping me? How is this helping? The point I want to make is that there was a whole world of research that the only people that I know of that really tapped into it other than the academics were marketing people trying to figure out how to sell you something. And the whole area of law, what we heard when we go to these conferences was what I call experiential stories. I do this. You get this guy and he's got this phenomenal verdict, or a lady, and she's got this wonderful verdict. And she said, this is what I did, this is what I did. Well, that's all experiential. There's not a whole hell of a lot scientific about that, because there's so much in trial that involves with personality and case and what have you. I told one friend of mine, won't mention his name, he'd come up with this theory about preparation and trial of the case. And he was just going on and on. And I said, you weren't so bad before you came up with that. I think he'd lost 1 or 2 cases in his life before he knew this secret. So there are a lot of things that go into winning and losing. But we made it a point, and we'll try to make it a point today, to distinguish what we tell you that is research-based and what is experiential. I'll share with you some things that I do that I think have been helpful and I think might be helpful that are not research-based. And you decide. But I used to get sick when I'd hear people talk about anchoring, and you stand here when you do this and you stand there when you do that. And I'd go back and I'd do the research to try to find out where in the hell that came from, and it was nowhere. I don't know where some of these ideas came from. It may work, but it certainly wasn't in the research. So we're going to try to show you the difference. And let's try to get through this now.
I'm going to talk to you first about persuasive communication. And what I want you to keep in mind about this is when we all started working together, I was working in-house at what was then Atlas, now AAJ, doing political strategy and communication strategy, but also doing a lot of research on voters and jurors' attitudes toward the legal system. And I would bring to that my view of the world of communications and persuasive communication, which is based on psychology and persuasion theory, as well as political behavior. And Greg and David noticed that even though I was using a different lexicon and approaching it from a different perspective, substantively, what I was talking about was very, very similar to the jury bias model. And so I'm going to go through first, as the sort of background piece from my perspective, what I used to call the world according to Ed, how you approach the communications problem. And it is something which is not relevant just to talking to juries, just to talking in a political realm, just to talking in a marketing realm. It is relevant to having any kind of interaction with other people. Talking to your partners, talking to your loved ones, having an argument at the dinner table with your next door neighbor who thinks that for some reason, Spiro Agnew was the greatest politician that ever lived, whatever, okay? So it's general in that respect, but also as we'll drill down, you see how it's applicable and in many ways similar to the jury bias model. And then from there, I'm going to go through some of the other developments. We'll talk a little bit about loss framing today, and then tomorrow I'm going to get into other areas. But let me first start by telling you that in my world,